Welcome to the Briefing Room. I'm Bill Froehlich from WTCM Radio, and it's our weekly roundup of some of the stories that have been making headlines here in northern Michigan lately. And with the journalists that cover those stories, this week at the table with me, Peter Payette from Interlochen Public Radio. Peter, welcome back.
Hi, Bill.
Happy summer to you.
Same to you.
It is July 4th week, and long sleeves and sweatshirts.
That's right.
45 degrees overnight.
I almost turned my heat on this morning. I woke up, it was kind of cold. I thought I'd throw the furnace on. I didn't do it, but I thought about it, and I thought, no, it's July 3rd. I can't do that.
Tough it out.
Right.
No complaints, right?
Yeah.
We're still 80 degrees warmer than we were a few months ago. So
Indeed.
We'll take it.
Great way to look at it.
We've got Cherry Festival coming up, which a lot of us are talking about, but another berry that we're not talking about quite as much
But we are.
is the Saskatoon berry. And that's just kind of a fun, something unique, fun and different for us to kind of pay attention to in the news.
Right. It's kind of new, and of course up here in the food culture, everybody's looking for something new, some new little niche to fill. And I did a piece. It's been a few weeks since I aired the story, but it's kind of a fun story because essentially it's a group of growers who almost none of them were farmers before they got into this berry. The guy who's the president of the marketing association that they've formed for the Saskatoon, he's a retired auto worker. And there's another grower who is a cabinet maker and has started a business selling berries, selling dried berries and filling for pies, and also selling the rootstock to people that want to plant Saskatoon bushes. Mm-hmm. And another guy's a retired school superintendent, and he's got a few acres, and so they've launched this industry, and now they're to the point where they have enough acreage of mature plants that probably like this week or next week they're going to start supplying fruit into grocery stores. And as far as I could tell, this has never happened in the United States. This berry grows wild up in Canada, and about 30 years ago some Canadian farmers started to domesticate it, and so they've been doing it there for a little while, but no one's really picked it up in the U.S. And this group of guys now has, I think they're mostly guys, and they've sort of developed a commodity at this point, very tiny market
space on the shelf.
Yes,
I assume it's just local, Grand Traverse area grocery stores.
No, they were talking about I don't know, I haven't confirmed where they are actually distributing these Saskatoons, but I did have an email that indicated there was some interest in Detroit and maybe some specialty stores like Zingerman's in Ann Arbor. There were some stores. I talked to a guy in Colorado who is a food distributor who services sort of specialty markets. And he says he's been looking around all over for these berries. Because his customers are asking if he can get them because they're hearing about them. And as he put it to me, if someone is distributing these berries, they're keeping it a pretty good secret because he's not been able to find anyone anywhere. I don't know that this group in the Grand Traverse region is ready to start distributing nationwide yet, but they've got to start on it.
Well, that's kind of cool. When I first heard about the Saskatoon, honestly, my first thought was, that sounds like a macaroon. Is that a cookie? I mean, what are we dealing with? And then I was kind of surprised to learn the berry itself has been around, 100 years or more? I mean, this is not, some crossbreed fruit that someone just kind of came up with recently.
Right. Yeah, I don't know too much about its origin as a cultivated plant for orchards. I just know what I looked at briefly, that it grows wild and is it's wild harvested, like blueberries in Michigan. Up in the UP, harvesting wild blueberries is a pretty common activity, and there's even some, if you go into the right diner in the UP, you can get a slice of wild blueberry pie. But I don't know much about the transition to a cultivated plant.
Did you go on location somewhere to do some interviews? Have you actually tasted the Saskatoon?
I have not tasted a fresh one because my reporting was close to a month ago. So I tasted dried Saskatoons, and I tasted a jam and pie. and they were all quite good. It looks like a blueberry, but it doesn't really taste anything like a blueberry. It's heartier. In the jam, it holds its shape more, so you can actually see the whole berry. It doesn't sort of turn to mush when it's cooked into a jam. It has kind of a nutty flavor, I think I was told, because there's the little seeds in it. One of the growers described it as having a taste almost like an almond. It's actually, the plant is in the rose family, like the apple. And another person described it as having a sort of taste like apple seeds. So it has an interesting
I was going to say, I've heard
flavor.
about a dozen different descriptions of what it actually tastes like. So.
I think they're great. When you dry a blueberry, it just turns into this tiny little pellet. These are a little larger. They have more substance to them.
So when you talk to these farmers, I mean, how much time of their retired life are they devoting now to the Saskatoon? What are we talking about total acreage here in the area?
Not much. So if you have 5 acres, you're big Saskatoon at that point. I think the most I saw was, to my knowledge, there's nobody with more than 5 acres. There's only 30 or 40 acres in production at this point in sort of northern Michigan, and I think one of those farms is over in Alpena. I believe there are growers downstate, but I'm not entirely clear how many. Jim Dixon, who's the president of I may get this wrong, but I think it was the Saskatoon Berry Institute of North America. That's the association name.
The one that just formed?
In the last year or two. I'm not sure how recently it formed, but so he knows of about 20 growers in this region, and only 2, as far as he could recall, were farmers before they started growing Saskatoons. Steve Duchesne, whose business I believe is called Saskatoon, Michigan, or Michigan Saskatoon, he's up in Williamsburg. Yeah. He's a cabinet maker, and he's the one that raises rootstock and will sell you plants. And he's in his home with under a cottage kitchen type approach. He's done a lot of the drying and creating pie filler and stuff like that. He said to me that he might be able to get out of, he's thinking he may be able to get out of cabinet making and go into this fruit business full time. So,
wow.
And that's the interesting thing about it, because entrepreneurial farming is so exciting up here. It kind of connects to our restaurant scene in Traverse City. Farming's very expensive to get into, and especially, I don't know how anyone could get into cherry farming. I don't know where you would come up with, unless a family business is passed to you. I don't know where anyone could come up with the capital to buy 40 acres of cherries and the equipment you would need and start doing that. I don't know how that's possible, but you could plant, in the thousands of dollars, you could plant a few acres of Saskatoons and be kind of at the front edge of what is a pretty promising new fruit industry.
Do you have a sense of how the rest of the ag industry would welcome the Saskatoon? Are we looking at a big future for this berry?
Right. Well, that's the question now, is will experienced growers who are growing cherries or apples or whatever, will they look at this and say, I'm going to get in? The sense I had was that it's these kind of people who are new to farming who got it going, because an existing farmer, an experienced farmer is looking for are market signals to show what the value of this is. Yeah. Well, there were no market signals, so there was nothing for someone who knows about the fruit business to evaluate. So, and also another explanation I heard for why growers didn't want to join in is that they're kind of skeptical of the hype. There's a lot of hype around food here, yeah, if you haven't noticed, and they kind of are turned off by that a little bit. So as one extension agent put it, it's these guys who didn't know anything about farming, who didn't know enough to be skeptical. So now the question is, now that they've kind of plowed or started the path here, will some of these other growers come in, and if they do, then they'll plant 10 acres, or you might start to see the acreage ramp up quickly.
So I'm predicting we'll see, a Saskatoon corner of the table at the Cherry Festival tent by next year.
Well, at least these berries are being harvested
In
right
season,
now.
yeah.
Yeah, they're in season while the festival is going on. And Steve Fouch, the retired extension agent from MSU, he predicted that one day we might need a Saskatoon festival because he thinks that this berry is just right. It's a good fit. It's quite cold hardy. I mean, it can really endure frost.
I was going to ask about that too.
Yeah, in 2012, when almost every cherry and most of the apples were wiped out, there were some Saskatoon growers. Some of them got hit pretty hard, but there were some growers who held on to like half a crop. So it can weather, because it comes from northern Canada. I mean, out of like. Well, I guess I'm not entirely clear, but sort of in the central, not up in near the Arctic, but sort of in central Midwest Canada. That's where a lot of them are grown. It gets pretty cold there, so it can endure very cold temperatures. And apparently, the acidity of the soil in northern Michigan is just right for this. Apparently, we don't have very good soil for blueberries. It seemed one thing that I heard often was that these growers, well, first I looked into blueberries. I thought about blueberries, and then I learned that the soil isn't very good for blueberries here, but it's perfect for Saskatoon. So that's another reason that it's been promoted and people are excited.
We'll get Tim Allen or Jeff Daniels to voice the Saskatoon ads.
Pure Michigan.
That's right. Speaking of pure Michigan, fishing industry is another big one, obviously, up north, and you've done a story recently on some changes in the Great Lakes. Right,
so there was quite a bit of attention statewide to a proposal to a proposal to expand the fish hatchery in Grayling. I think it's called the Grayling Fish Hatchery. It used to be owned by the state of Michigan. It's kind of a tourist site. People like to visit it and tour it. And a company out of Harrietta called Harrietta Troutfish Farm. Yeah, maybe getting that wrong. But a guy named Dan Vogler seems to be sort of the manager of this family business. They have another farm down in Harrietta, and then they raise fish in the Grayling hatchery. Right up until this week, they had a permit to raise, or they were raising up to 20,000 pounds of trout there a year. Under their new permit, they can raise 300,000 pounds of trout. And this was somewhat controversial. A group called Anglers of the Asabo got involved in the permit proposal and wanted more stringent regulations, wanted more testing than what the state originally had proposed, because fish create a lot of poo, and it puts phosphorus and nitrogen, and it loads nutrients into rivers that shouldn't be there. And this facility flows into the Asabo just above the Holy Waters, which is this pristine stretch of revered trout fishing water on the Asabo River, which is probably the most renowned trout fishing stream in the state of Michigan. So the permit was issued this week. The state did actually beef up the requirements. In particular, they're going to make him test quite a bit more, I think, like maybe 10 times more than the original permit proposal would have had him testing to make sure that he's not putting in more effluent. And the interesting story, what's interesting in all that is that this may just be the kind of the tip of the iceberg for fish farming. Fish farming is on the rise all over the world, and the federal government is pushing the idea that we should farm more fish. Fish is I think becoming quite a bit more popular in people's diets. All these protein diets fish is very healthy, and so there's a lot of interest in developing aquaculture. And we have almost none in Michigan. We have very little fish farming. This facility, the Grayling Fish Hatchery, will be the largest by far in the state, and there's the total industry is just really tiny. This will also there's discussion about having open water pens out on the Great Lakes. You see these on ocean coasts. They'll farm salmon in these big net cages, and it has not been done much on the Great Lakes. There are some fish farms over on the Canadian side of Lake Huron, mostly in Georgian Bay. So there is it does happen. But it'll be a real it'll be pretty controversial if it comes to pass. But a federal organization, the Sea Grant program, which is a federal program, they published a paper in January really promoting this idea, saying Michigan could have a $1 billion plus aquaculture industry, and looking at some of the challenges of farming fish out on the Great Lakes.
Is this all, fish farming for the end result of catching? Is it commercial?
For food. That's a great point.
You sell it out to restaurants from the fish farms?
Yeah, groceries and restaurants. That's where this company in Henrietta, that's how they sell their fish. And that, because the Great Lakes, we've been farming fish in the Great Lakes for 50 years or more. I mean,
right.
Almost any large fish you catch in the Great Lakes, salmon or lake trout, probably was born in a fish tank. I mean, there are some wild salmon. There now are just a few wild lake trout, but most of the big predators in the lake are born in a fish hatchery, fed by a person, and then released into the lake for someone to catch. So, but that's a different industry than raising fish because those are little fingerlings that they put in. So they just have to kind of get the fish started out, and then they release the fingerlings out. This is raising fish to adult size in order to fillet it and eat it.
Gotcha. Another fishing-related story that's going on in Manistee County, the new visitor center at the Manistee Fishing Weir. I mean, that's got an impact as well financially. Their construction has already started. They're trying to build this visitor center and draw some tourists into Manistee for the weir there.
Yeah, and I don't know much about that. I thought that was a great idea, though. We, my family, we took a trip down that way in, I think, early October, not last fall, but the fall before. I mean, that's a fun place to go and camp and hang out at that season, because I mean, that is, for fishing, that's like the epicenter of the world for the Great Lakes salmon fishery.
Right.
And there, we ended up at the dam. If I have these things connected in the right spot, and there's just hundreds of fishermen lining the banks, and the salmon are just swirling in there, and it's a great idea. But I don't know much about what the facility is, or.
Yeah, I mean, plan for a visitor center to be open in time for next year. I was surprised. We have 4 weirs in our region, and the DNR said, well, this is one of 5 weirs in the state, and the other one's over in the Thumb area, I think. And it just
Swan Creek.
Yeah, what blew me away was we only have 5 fishing weirs in the state. I mean, with the fact that we have 4 in our region, just kind of made me assume they're all over the place. But we only have 5 in the whole state, and Manistee is one of the most popular spots.
Destinations.
Yeah.
So what are the 4? The weirs are the collection points, right? So the Platte, the Boardman, the Manistee.
Well, they've only got the one in downtown Traverse City.
Yeah, that's the Boardman.
The Boardman.
Yeah.
Manistee, there's one up towards Charlevoix.
Oh yeah, that's right. And then
the
Platte, the Platte River would be the 4th.
Okay, in Benzie.
Yes.
So yeah, I was just under the assumption that they're lining the rivers all over the place, but they're really not. So.
Well, of course, the one thing about that idea is that I don't know how many more years the salmon fishery has in Lake Michigan. I mean, there's no salmon fishery left in Lake Huron now, although there is. Even though it's a remnant, they do still collect some fish at the weir. I think it's on Swan Creek over on Lake Huron. I believe that's where the collection point is. So what's left, those fish do come back to there, but the signs are not very good for Lake Michigan. So I wonder how active that weir will be.
Salmon fishing pen
in the years ahead. I guess though, I mean, on this side there are so many wild fish. They think about half the salmon fishery is now wild, and a lot of those fish are in the Manistee. So I guess salmon now in perpetuity will be running up that river, even if it's different than the gargantuan sort of man-made fishery that we've had.
Right. Well, let's talk finally about one more water-related issue, and that's one that's, I guess it's been ongoing for dozens of years, but it's just kind of picking up some intensity in the conversation point up in the Straits.
Yeah.
This pipeline under It runs right under the bridge. It's
Runs
getting
right-
a lot of attention.
5 miles of pipeline running under the Straits of Mackinaw.
So essentially, we've got a lot of people concerned about it, and
Right.
the company that operates it saying everything's good.
Everything's good. Right. So the story's, I guess, been going on for about a year. I think I was not around last summer, but I think...
And we've talked about it here before in
Right.
terms of the background. But
Right. I'm not sure that it's changed much. What happened was the company that owns it, Enbridge, a Canadian company, had a massive spill in the Kalamazoo River, and that was in 2010. That mess is still being cleaned up today. So it was quite a disaster down there, and people started to ask, well, what would happen if the pipeline under the Straits ruptured? It's 60 years old.
disaster.
It would be a disaster. Although the Coast Guard has a response plan. One of the things they talked about at this forum last week was that the Coast Guard has been doing a lot of work to figure out how they would respond through the ice. That was one of the questions that I thought was interesting that came up at this forum. There was a forum in Petoskey last week, and it wasn't quite as well attended. I thought they would fill the house of 300 seats. My reporter said it only looked to be about half full, so that was sort of interesting. But that was one of the things they discussed, was responding through the ice. I had a 15-minute interview with the vice president they sent, who's the head of their U.S. operations. I can't say that I know much more after talking to him. He insists that this pipeline is constantly monitored and that it is basically in perfect condition. I mean, he could not indicate to me any flaws, any areas of concern. And I said, so you're telling me after 60 years this pipeline is in pristine condition? I'm fairly certain the word I used was pristine in the question. And he said, yes, it's in very good condition, I think was what he said. But he claims that the thing looks great and they're on top of it. And when I asked him to provide some comfort to people who are worried about their track record in Kalamazoo, he basically said he was there to talk about the pipeline under the Straits, which he says is doing well.
What's the lifespan of a pipeline?
Well, and that was the other. He says that's not. They don't really look at it that way. It doesn't have a lifespan in the way you would think when you ask that question. I can only conclude, he did not put it this way, but I can only conclude that they think it has a potentially unlimited lifespan.
Are there, backup pipelines along the way? Is it a pipeline encased within another pipeline? Are there shut-off emergency valves? Do we know any of those answers at this point?
I did not ask that question. That would be the question. Where is the shut-off valve? And I did not go to the forum. I don't know if that was discussed at the forum.
Probably next to the toll at the bridge. They can just reach over and crank that off
just
if you're driving through,
Right. Yeah, I don't know. The other issue that's kind of hanging out there, and I wish I was better informed about the particulars of this, but the Tip of the Mitt Watershed Council, which hosted the forum in Petoskey, they've asked to receive copies of the reports that this company files with the federal government, which I assume you could get with a FOIA.
Right.
For some reason, Enbridge has refused to share that information. And when I asked why, he gave an answer, something to the effect of, well, I guess I can't even really characterize his answer, but he said it can just get confusing if too many people are giving opinions. But I always thought with your doctor, second opinion's a good thing to get. If you have a real critical issue you're trying to understand. I asked Tip of the Mitt why they just don't FOIA them, and I was told that they just don't want to do that at this point. But I'm assuming that I can't imagine that, and this is why I say I wish I was a little better informed here, but I would be surprised if there was any way that those reports could be shielded from a FOIA request. Right. And I think Jim Olson at FLOW, the advocacy group that he's formed recently. Jim's an attorney, an environmental attorney in Traverse City. I think they have some of the reporting data. I'm not entirely clear. Jim says he's going to come out with some kind of paper or report on this, and my sense was that he's FOIA'd some of the information that Enbridge provides to the federal government.
Well, we were talking, half hour ago before we sat down about what's next with this, and it's kind of a case of we're just going to keep talking about it. I mean, there's nothing. We don't know if there's really anything anybody can do. The pipeline's working, and they have the right to do it, and
right.
We're just going along with the flow.
And again, I'll say I wish I was better informed on this story, but I think that there's some hope that maybe the state would exercise some jurisdiction that it may or may not have. There may be some question about what authority the state has in this matter. The lease that the state gave to Enbridge, or gave to the predecessor company back in the 50s to put a pipeline in, it's my understanding it's in perpetuity, that as long as, they have an agreement to use because that's state land, the bottom of the lake, bottom of the straits there, but that agreement is there as long as they want to have a pipeline, even if they have to replace it. So I'm not sure what anybody can do.
All right. Well, Peter, thanks so much for sitting in with us this week here in the briefing room. Thanks for all your insight.
Pleasure.
Good to have you back. And thanks everyone for tuning in to the briefing room. I'm Bill Froehlich from WTCM Radio, and we'll see you next time right here on the briefing room.